Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. hurts or helps both Donald Trump and Joe Biden. So we're going to be taking a look at two different types of scenarios with two electoral maps in a scenario in which Kennedy's impact being on the ballot in every single state would either hurt or help both Biden and Trump. But before we get started, make sure you are subscribed and click the bell so you get notified whenever I upload a video instead of missing out on any of them. Let's start off with the first scenario out of the two in which Joe Biden actually benefits from Kennedy's presence. And then towards the end of the video, I'll do the second scenario in which Trump actually benefits. So if Biden were to benefit from RFK Jr.'s presence, I think Iowa would be likely instead of safe for Donald Trump, because without Kennedy helping Biden, I think Iowa would be won by Trump by double digits of roughly 10 percentage points. For Ohio, I think it would still be likely for Trump, but not lean, because it won't be enough to actually, I think Kennedy can take away some of that support from Donald Trump in Ohio, but I don't think it's going to be enough to actually make it from a likely to a lean margin. I think Trump wins that by roughly 7 percentage points. If Biden were to benefit from Kennedy's presence, Kennedy actually pulls a lot of support away from Republicans and Democrats pretty equally. It's not really one over the other. For example, Kennedy can appeal somewhat to the MAGA base because he was really anti-vax, which was actually more important and relevant back in the 2020 election, and not so much relevant as of right now. So maybe it won't deal as much as damage because obviously the vaccine is not relevant to where it was back in 2020, 4 years ago. So it may or it may not, impact the race in favor of Biden. So that's where he basically appeals from the right with his anti-vax rhetoric and basically anti-establishment. And then states like Florida, I think regardless if Kennedy helps or does not help Biden, I think Florida is going to be likely for Donald Trump. He's going to win that by roughly 7 percentage points. And then as for Texas, I think things can get interesting here, but Donald Trump is going to win that by a lean to likely margin. In this scenario, I would say Trump wins it by roughly 6 percentage points, which is about 1% better than his 2020 margin in this state. Keep in mind, back in 2020, Trump won Texas by roughly 5 percentage points. So I actually have him improving on his margins. And if you guys are wondering, Trump actually performs worse with Kennedy on the ballot. When Kennedy gets roughly almost 9% of the overall popular vote, Trump is up by only 1%, at 41% to Joe Biden's 40% when you factor in Kennedy. But when you take away Kennedy, Trump actually expands his lead. And actually a new NBC poll came out with a new poll in which Biden wins by 2% with Kennedy being a factor in this race. But when you take away Kennedy, the NBC poll shows that Trump is up by 2%. So clearly, when it comes to all of this polling data, Kennedy takes away more from Trump than he does to Biden. 15% of Trump voters switched over to Kennedy, while, on the other hand, 7% of Biden voters switch over to Kennedy. So Kennedy would take away, I would say, about 50% more from Trump voters rather than Biden voters. Obviously, both the Biden administration and Donald Trump's campaign does not want Kennedy whatsoever. They are trying to be anti-Kennedy. They do not want to be, friendly, because if they are, then they can take away from both, parties. And with that being said, the Biden administration does not want Kennedy. The entire Kennedy family, besides RFK himself, endorsed Joe Biden, and Trump is trying to portray him as someone who is far right, extreme, farther to the left than Joe Biden is. So neither Trump or Biden wants to be friendly with Kennedy because they know he can take away votes and be a spoiler. And RFK knows this himself. He said that he is a spoiler, and he admitted to it, and that he's taking away votes from both Biden and Trump somewhat equally, around the same. But he did say that Kennedy did say that he's taking away slightly more from Trump than he is to Biden. But we're going to see how all that plays off in this video and basically on Election Day as well. And I think that Joe Biden would win Virginia by roughly 7 percentage points if Kennedy were to help him out. And then Colorado would be safe. I think Biden wins this by roughly double digits of around 10%. So comfortable margin, similar to his 2020 margin. I think basically the state of Colorado is just trending and shifting towards the left in favor of Democrats and in favor of Joe Biden. This state will just not shift to the right in 2024. And then as for New Mexico, I think it will be somewhat more closer than Colorado would be, but both of them I think would go to Biden by a likely margin. But this time, instead of 10%, I think New Mexico would go to Biden by 7 percentage points. And then as for a state like Georgia, I think that can get somewhat close, but in my opinion, that's going to be one of the easier flips for Donald Trump in this election. Keep in mind, Biden only won it by roughly 11,000 votes, which is 0.3% to be exact. And the main reason why Biden won this back in 2020 was because he had that BLM momentum. He got high turnout among African-American voters. It cracked nearly 90%, in which I don't expect him to do so this time around, considering that his approval rating is below 40% in the gutter. And he's just very unpopular. And considering that, I honestly think Trump can improve in Atlanta, the Atlanta suburbs. If Biden is not able to hold on to his 2020 numbers, then he's not going to win this state. And I think Trump wins it by roughly 3% in a scenario in which Kennedy were to help Biden. Biden would benefit from him. I still think regardless, Trump wins Georgia at the end of the day, no matter if Kennedy does or does not help Biden. And as for North Carolina, I think this state is slightly more red than Georgia is. Just keep in mind, when Georgia flipped to Biden in 2020, North Carolina did the exact opposite, and they stayed for Donald Trump. Trump won this state by roughly 1.5 percentage points in a more favorable year for Joe Biden. Keep in mind, he was seen as more of a moderate candidate back in the 2020 election. So considering that he is not viewed as the same like 4 years ago, his approval rating was like 10 points better than where he is now. Like 2020 Biden was completely different from the Biden we are seeing today in the year of 2024. And so considering that, I think North Carolina as a whole is just shifting towards the right. And so they may elect a Democratic governor, but that's completely different from the general election. So I think Trump is way more favored in this state. And considering he still won it in less favorable year, 2024 would obviously be a little bit more favorable for Donald Trump. He's not facing, the greatest outlash of COVID and all that stuff. So considering that, I think Trump is only going to expand on his lead in North Carolina. No matter whether Biden does or does not benefit from Kennedy, I still think Trump wins North Carolina. And then as for New Hampshire, I think Biden would win this state by roughly 6 percentage points, so basically a lean margin. Keep in mind, he won this state by roughly 7% back in the 2020 election, in which I still think he's going to win it, but not by that great amount. Obviously, he's way less popular than where he was 4 years ago, and so I think it would get narrower, but Biden should still win the state at the end of the day. And then a state like Minnesota, I think, would vote similar to a state like New Hampshire. I know they're very different states, but they actually vote very similarly. You compare the 2016 election to the 2020 results. Minnesota and New Hampshire voted in similar margins, 1 to 2% for Clinton, and then 2020, they had the exact same margins for Biden. Both of these states went to Biden by roughly 7 percentage points. So considering that, I think whatever goes on in Minnesota, the same thing will for New Hampshire. And whatever goes on in New Hampshire, the same thing will happen in Minnesota. They vote very similar in basically one direction. So I think Biden is going to win Minnesota and New Hampshire by, I would say, 5 percentage points in both of these states with the same margins. And then as for the Sunbelt state of Arizona, I think this state overall is just trending in favor of the left. Obviously, they just elected Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs in the 2022 midterms, which they haven't done so since, I believe, 2009. So you can see these trends. This state has a lot of neocons in which basically the establishment, that a lot of them actually did not vote for Trump in 2020, and a lot of the establishment and neocons in the state might have actually voted for Biden on top of the independents going to Biden in 2020, which is the main reason why Biden won this state. And considering that he only won it by 10,000 votes, which is roughly 0.4%, it was extremely close. And I think Trump could flip the state, but it would not shock me if Biden held on to Arizona in this year's election cycle, considering in a scenario in which Kennedy does help Biden, I think Biden's going to actually pull out the victory by roughly 1 to 2 percentage points. And whatever is going on with the border, if that impacts, voters a lot, and considering that it is their number one priority issue, I think Trump can win this state. But at the end of the day, in a scenario in which Kennedy does help Biden, meaning he takes away more support from Trump, I think it might be enough to actually, cause the state to go to Biden once again. And then as for Nevada, the state went to Biden by roughly 2.5 percentage points back in the 2020 presidential election. And so this state, Republicans have been basically overhyped every single election cycle, not just in general elections, but also midterms as well. For example, back in 2022, Adam Laxalt basically was poised to do so much better than what he actually resulted and performed. He underperformed massively and lost to Catherine Cortez Masto. So Republicans always are overestimated in terms of polling in this state alone. So Trump is currently up by roughly 3 to 4 percentage points. And now if there was a polling error on top of Kennedy helping Biden, I think Biden will be the narrow victor in this state by its whole margin of around a percentage point. Don't get me wrong, Nevada is shifting towards the right, and basically the only thing that's holding and keeping Republicans back from actually flipping this state, basically Clark County, Democratic stronghold. So if Clark County never existed, obviously Nevada would always vote Republican. But Clark County is that one Democratic stronghold that is holding Republicans back from actually flipping the state. Trump needs to perform in line with the polling in this state, and if he doesn't, he's probably not going to win Nevada. And then moving on to the Rust Belt before we move on to the second scenario in which Trump actually benefits from Kennedy's presence being on the ballot. As for the Rust Belt state of Wisconsin, I honestly think that this is 50-50 toss-up for either candidate. Keep in mind, Trump won this state by a greater margin than Biden did. Trump won it by 0.8%. On the other hand, Biden won it by 0.6%. So I can tell you right now that this state might not be as much as an easy win for Joe Biden as what you may think, considering that Trump had a greater margin than what Biden did, and it was more favorable for him in 2020. And so considering that, I honestly do think that if Kennedy were to help Biden, Trump still could actually flip this state. Similar to Georgia, I think it could be an easy flip. And Biden won this state by 20,000 votes, which is under a percentage point. But at the end of the day, I think Biden would win this state by, once again, under percentage point within like 15,000 votes. That's how dead close I think it will be if Kennedy were to take away the support from Trump, which would basically spoil the race in favor of Biden. And then as for Michigan, neighboring Wisconsin, obviously both Rust Belt states, you saw what happened in the Democratic primaries. Roughly 100,000 people voted uncommitted, so we really don't know what's going on. Obviously, we can get a sense that the state is shifting in favor of Donald Trump with the uncommitted vote, but that alone might not be enough to flip the state. So if Kennedy were to, take away some of that support from Trump, I honestly think Biden would narrowly pull off a victory in Michigan once again. I think the margin was just too great for Trump to overcome back in 2020. Biden won it by almost 3 percentage points, which is over 200,000 votes. So Trump's going to need a whole lot of campaigning to do if he wants to win Michigan in 2024. And considering in a scenario in which Kennedy helps Biden, I think Biden wins Michigan once again. And then the last and final state before we move on to the second and last scenario in which Trump actually benefits from Kennedy, I think Biden is going to win Pennsylvania. And if he's able to overperform what the polls are suggesting in, the Philadelphia area, the Pittsburgh suburbs, usually Democratic strongholds, and if he's able to hold on to Erie County, located in northwestern Pennsylvania, that county was crucial to a Biden victory in 2020, and it helped Trump win Pennsylvania in 2016. Basically, every single president going back to 2008 who won Erie County in Pennsylvania basically won the state. It kind of reminds me of Maricopa in Arizona. That's how similar those two counties are. They're very important. So at the end of the day, I think Biden's going to win Pennsylvania. He won the state by roughly 80,000 votes back in 2020, which is 1.2% to be exact. And Pennsylvania honestly is a toss-up too, and it's Biden's home state. And with that being said, I think it would be embarrassing if Biden does not win his home state in 2024. So at the end of the day, if Kennedy were to, be a spoiler and help Biden, I think Biden wins re-election with 287 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 251 electoral votes, falling short once again. So this is the finalized map for a scenario in which Kennedy helps Biden. Let me know what states you agree or disagree with in the comment section down below. And then as for the second scenario and the last scenario before I end up the video, if Trump actually benefits from Kennedy, meaning Kennedy takes more support away from Biden, than he is to Donald Trump, which is the exact opposite of what the polls are suggesting. So let's say if the polls are wrong, it's like Iowa would actually be a solid red. I think it'll go to Trump by double digits. I think Ohio could be similar. I think Trump is going to win that in the high 9%. And then a state like Florida, I think, would comfortably go to Donald Trump by roughly 7 to 8 percentage points. And I think Texas would go to Trump by a likely margin as well by roughly 7 percentage points. Considering the border crisis, the number one issue in which Biden is struggling on the most out of any other issue happens to be immigration. And that is the number one priority issue to a lot of these voters. And if that's the case, voters are really impacted by this. Obviously, the issue of immigration will only go in favor of Donald Trump, and he's going to expand his lead in the state of Texas from his 2020 margin in 2024. So I think states like states like Colorado, Biden's going to win that by, I would say, 9 to 10 percentage points, so arguably likely to safe. Depends where you have it at. I honestly think that Biden's going to comfortably win Colorado, regardless if Kennedy does or does not help Donald Trump. And I think New Mexico would be somewhat a little bit more competitive. I think Trump wins it in this scenario specifically by 6 percentage points, which is arguably a lean to likely margin. And then I think states like Virginia would go to Biden by roughly 5 to 6 points. Keep in mind, Trump got endorsed by the governor here, Glenn Youngkin, who is very popular. His approval rating is above 50%, sitting at a 58% currently. So maybe that could, the endorsement of the Virginia governor to Donald Trump could sway some of that support in favor of Donald Trump. And considering Kennedy does help Trump, I think Virginia could actually get scary close. It's going to get very close. Keep in mind, Biden won this state by 10% in 2020. That was more of a favorable year, and this time Trump is backed by the governor there, and if Kennedy does help him, I think the state can get very close, but no matter how close it does get, still not going to be enough for Trump to outcome to actually flip the state. I think Trump is easily going to flip Georgia in 2024. I think he should win that by roughly anywhere between 4 to 6 percentage points. I think he's going to improve vastly from his 2020 margin, considering that Trump is actually polling around 1/4 among African American voters, which is roughly 25%, doing better than any other Republican candidate for president in a long time. Not really something that you see nowadays. So if that were to be the real numbers on election day, Trump is easily going to win Georgia. And then as for North Carolina, I stated this earlier, this state, in my opinion, is slightly more red than Georgia is. And I think Trump is going to expand on his margin from 2020. He's going to win North Carolina by roughly 3 to 4 percentage points. So no matter if Mark Robinson does or does not win the governor's race, I still think Trump is easily going to win this state. A state like New Hampshire, I think Biden's going to win this by roughly 4 to 5 percentage points. This state doesn't really like incumbents, and obviously Joe Biden was the challenger back in the 2020 election. So with that being said, it would be less favorable for him in 2024, and he was seen more as a moderate candidate. And obviously we had COVID. People wanted change. They wanted a change in leadership, and that's what Joe Biden brings to the table. And this time around, it's not similar to 2020. I think this election is actually more closer to 2016 rather than 2020 with all these third-party candidates options. Keep in mind that Trump performed better in 2016 rather than 2020 was because he was limited. We did not have as many third-party candidates and options as we did in 2016 compared to 2020, which is only going to help Donald Trump. And then I think Minnesota would go to Biden by roughly 4 percentage points. Obviously, you had the BLM shenanigans in Minneapolis, heavy Democratic strongholds, and if Biden is not able to perform very well here, I think he can get close, but still he's going to win it at the end of the day. It honestly comes down to suburban women, them being white specifically, abortion, if that does impact the race. And then as for Nevada, I think Trump is going to flip the state if Kennedy does end up, spoiling the race in favor of Donald Trump. The state overall is shifting towards the right. If Trump flips Reno County, I think he's on track to win the state. And if he, performs in line with the polling in Clark County, if he peels a lot of that support away from Biden, I think he can very well flip the state in 2024. So I have Trump winning Nevada by roughly a percentage point in this year's election cycle. And then as for Arizona, keep in mind, I stated this earlier, what's happening with the border crisis. If it is the number one priority issue among voters, which it as if right now it is, I think it's only going to go in favor of Donald Trump. Joe Biden is disapproved on immigration by roughly 33 percentage points underwater as of today. And if those are the real numbers, I think Arizona is going to go to Donald Trump by roughly 1 to 2 percentage points in 2024. And obviously, you saw what happened with the 1864 abortion ruling. I think that could help Biden, but if it does not, I think the state is more than likely going to flip to Donald Trump in 2024. And then moving on to the Rust Belt to close out the video, Wisconsin, I think, is going to flip to Donald Trump by, I would say, a little bit over 1%, maybe 1.5 percentage points, somewhere around there. To be specific, I think places like Milwaukee, typically Democratic strongholds. I think places like Green Bay, typically Republican strongholds. If Biden does not overperform in what the polls are saying, I think he's honestly going to lose the state. And obviously, it comes down to suburban women going to decide to stay. I think Wisconsin is the whitest, swing state out of any other swing state so far. And then as for Michigan, you saw what happened. 100,000 people voted uncommitted. So who the hell knows what's going on there? Honestly, I think Michigan is a wild card. I think Biden can win it. I think Trump could win it. It's going to be very close no matter what happens on Election Day. When it comes to African American voters, places like Detroit, if they are not happy with the Biden administration, I think a lot of them can go to Cornell West, and some of them might go to Kennedy. And so that could be enough for Trump to win the state by under percentage point in 2024. It's going to be very close. And the Pennsylvania, like I mentioned earlier, it's Biden's home state. So if he doesn't win it, it's going to be very embarrassing. And in this scenario, I think if Kennedy does help Trump, I think Trump does actually pull off a victory in this state. If Trump flips Erie County, if he performs very well, and if Biden underperforms in Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia and those suburbs, I think Trump is on track to win Pennsylvania in 2024. Rust Belt states, it comes down to union workers. Obviously, Biden was endorsed by them, and then Trump is actually endorsed by I think it was called the Police Association in Michigan. So it could play a role. And honestly, it comes down to whatever happens on Election Day. You got to vote. And in my opinion, if you don't vote, you have no right to complain about the results. So this is the finalized map in a scenario in which Kennedy does help Trump. Trump wins by 312 electoral votes to Joe Biden's 226. And then you compare this to a scenario in which Biden benefits from Kennedy. Biden wins with 287 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 251. So let me know which scenario you agree with more. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe as we are approaching 2,000, and click the bell to get notified whenever I upload a video instead of missing out on any of them. And one last final reminder is we have memberships and custom perks and custom emojis that you can use in the comment section whenever you comment on any of my videos. Thank you, everyone.